Hi everyone, I'm Koki from 11th grade, and I'd like to talk about technology replacing paper. So we see technology everywhere now these days. We have laptops over here, iPad filming me, and we can see a bunch of other laptops and computers and devices that you can see. But I believe that there is a point where technology can completely replace paper. And today I would like to talk about that in more detail. That's my title. This is a little hard to see, but this is a picture of a typical Japanese school. If you can't see, go back, think about the picture that you saw from Leon's presentation about the Japanese school. You can see that the tables are very small. These tables are roughly the size of a 15-inch laptop, and you cannot place anything else other than a laptop in the table. And here, this is another example, this time from an American middle school or high school. As you can see, the table's a little larger, but it's still not big enough to accommodate just a set of laptop and maybe another device or a paper. So I'd like to talk about what could change once we implement paperless classroom. So there will be a difference in interior-wise in the classroom, starting with the large monitor that we could have in the schools. As we currently have smart boards that operate in normal classes, teachers and students use smart boards to project a screen from the laptop to the class so that everyone can see in the large screen. And there could be laptops and tablets that could replace paper, notebooks, and other physical copies of things. And lastly, I want to point out that there could be 3D printers in each and every class if necessary. So, or there could be the possible case that a 3D printer can be placed in somewhere in the school, one of the classrooms, so that we could have a connection between the devices in the laptop and something printing, so that they could use the 3D printer to actually be innovative and create something and being creative. So I'd like to talk about the environmental impact of this paperless classroom. So by implementing paperless classroom, which means to completely abandon the usage of paper and to replace them with technology such as laptops, tablets, and computers, this would translate into about 178 million pages being saved, which is equivalent of 21,000 trees being saved. And this, and before replacing the papers with technology, we've been cutting down 5.5 trillion trees. No, we used to have 5.5 trillion trees before we cut the trees for paper, but now we only have 3 trillion trees, and there's a quite a number of decrease in the number of trees that we have in this world. And because of the decrease in trees, this could also reflect to the world becoming warmer, as there is less trees that could transform from carbon dioxide to normal oxygen. And then there's another section where it says 50 million per year, or 15 million trees are cut down every year, and 5 billion are planted. And therefore, there is not enough trees being planted for a number of trees being cut down for paper. So now I'd like to talk about the students' academic performance. That's the most important part as we replace papers with technology. So one of the factors is saving time. Easier to access files, which would translate into organization skills, saving storage spaces, which is also related to the organization skills, cost reduction in printing papers, buying new inks, and better security for teachers and students so that they can protect the students' personal information such as grades and other academic publishments and documents. And it's easier to collaborate and It's easier to collaborate and document sharing. So saving time is what I mean by is that it's related to the easier to access the files, but it's more about the organization skills that the students have. As we know, students tend to have folders that's messy and papers flying everywhere as they find a piece of paper that they need for a task. By having everything replaced by the computer and stored in the computer, students will be able to just search up the file using the Finder, which would take less than a minute for sure, unless if they forgot to name the file or something. And then they will be able to access the file as soon as they can. And then, when I talk about the saving storage spaces, I mean by storage spaces like the cubbies and cubbies basically that store books right now, and those can be cleaned up, and they could be replaced with other equipment, tools that could support students to help themselves work better with new technologies. And what I mean by better security, as I mentioned before, it's the security for students and teachers both to protect their gradebooks and academic records. And when I say about easier to collaborate, I mean by the example of Google Drive, how Google Drive is now enabling students to collaborate each other at the same time, even if they're in their homes, which means that they don't need to be at the same place, which could increase efficiency and productivity. I'd like to talk about real-life examples of paperless workspaces currently that's taking place. As you can see in the news articles recently, there have been many companies that has transformed from a normal workspace to a paperless workspace. And I would like to point out two key features that's very different. And starting with the computers, as you can see in the background picture, there's computers everywhere, and laptops everywhere, tablets everywhere as well. There are some papers out there, but I'll explain why there's still some papers there. But majority of the desk space is covered by computers, and people are working with computers to create documents. So why not introduce new technology? So I'd like to get out 3 points. First is the short-term cost is very expensive. As you know, buying new laptops, buying new smart boards is very, very expensive in the short run. However, teachers and staff and other members of school tend to focus on short-term costs rather than long-term costs. That's why a lot of schools, especially the Japanese school, tend to not implement paperless classrooms into schools. Well, however, the short-term cost is very expensive. The long-term cost is very effective, as we all know that in the long run, we would see students be able to adjust to the companies and companies who use these technologies to do stuff. And that's a very big advantage when compared to students who hasn't been exposed to technology. The second part is the tests and exams that are currently being done in paper. We do have some tests that is starting to transfer from paper tests to computer-based tests, but we still see that most of the tests and exams are done by physical paper. Therefore, students will need to also gain experience by doing some by doing tests on paper. And third is the time consumption of the transition. And it's very time consuming for students and teachers to get used to the environment of not having paper around them and instead rely on technology. And there's also a problem with teachers and staff and also students again to learn how to use new softwares and hardwares so that they could fully use the technology. So I'd like to get into the point that can there actually be 100% paperless space? And answer is no, currently. It is impossible at this stage to remove all paper, and as tests and exams are still done on paper. This also applies to offices, as all legal documents are currently done in a physical copy. Therefore, it is still impossible to have a fully paperless office. However, in the future, it is still possible to have paperless classrooms and offices, as everyone in this world progresses into paperless technology. So I'd like to get into the final part, which is the challenges transitioning from paper to paperless technology. So students and teachers will need to quickly adapt themselves into paperless classroom style and working methods. Then they need to learn new softwares and OS operating systems, which is very time-consuming and frustrating. And the third point is we would like to require new staff who can maintain the technology. That involves hiring new IT specialists, which would cost schools additional money to actually hire them and maintain those workers. Finally, I'd like to continue the point that although these challenges may be effective in the long period of time, it is very beneficial for schools as a whole, both for students and teachers to implement technology into classrooms so that the students can get used to the technological environment so that they could apply to the near future. Thank you.